It's funny, I was thinking about what awareness is and how to describe it and understand it. And even the phrase that I just said right there, thinking about awareness, it's difficult because you can't really think about what awareness is because awareness is. It just is. And I know that sounds like some sort of platitude that that is nonsensical, but it goes back to the idea of the nature of awareness and its spontaneous interaction with reality, and how thinking is a form of structure that attempts to take that spontaneous nature of thought, or perception would be a better term, and structure it in a way that it is understandable in the context of our five sense interpretation of reality. And in that connection, it's really interesting the metaphors that can be drawn from science. For example, there is the concept of black holes. And before going further, let's set aside questions about what is real and what is not real when it comes to quote-unquote space. But the concept of a black hole is a singularity, which has an event horizon such that at a certain point, which they would call the point of no return, nothing of any substance can escape the magnetic gravitational pull of the singularity inside the black hole, such that even light cannot escape, and thus you cannot see light in a black hole. Hence, it is a black hole, right? But it's interesting because each and every one of us has two black holes on our face that we call eyes, right? And the event horizon is where the pupil meets the iris. And from that point, not even light can escape its pull. And that is where our vision comes from. The light and everything that composes light is pulled into your two black holes, and it is then decoded by our synaptic decoding system in our brains that then produces an image based on that information that has gone through the two eyes. And in that connection, you can see why they would have used the character Stanley Kubrick to put out the information that was contained in 2001: A Space Odyssey and the black monolith, especially when you look at the television and computer screens, and how our vision is interacting with those mediums. In many ways, it's a replica of the eyes. And again, going back to structure, the screens are squares, while our eyes and pupils are round or spheres. You know, going back to the idea of masonry and the square and compass, the builders of civilization, they have their version of it, and the way that they influence what is going into our vision and thus what is decoded by our brains is a square, a rectangle. It's rigid, it's structure. as opposed to the natural version, which is the circle or sphere drawn by the compass. And then at the same time, we have our ears, and we hear things through our ears. And that is one letter removed from the heart, right? Our decoding of sound wave vibrations is more of a heart-centered activity. This is why music is so powerful. We feel things through music, as opposed to the vision, where we see things on a more intellectual level that's detached from emotion. But when it comes to the television or the computer and the internet, you can see how it's using both of those at the same time. We're both seeing and hearing things simultaneously. And that's why it's such a powerful tool of manipulation. You don't question things anymore, and you just kind of go with that flow. That's why it's called the mainstream, right? It's the mainstream of consciousness. And then you flow with that artificial culture, and then you are totally detached from your own stream of consciousness and how that stream of consciousness would interact with reality if it was not exposed to that programming. But all you can do is look at those sorts of things, and you can understand how this intelligence knows how to manipulate our awareness and our perception. But when we sit down and try to describe it or understand it, it's so difficult to put into words what is taking place. Especially when you begin to contemplate the nature of your own stream of consciousness and your own thought stream. And this is something that I've been contemplating for a long time. And I'm hesitant to discuss it just because I don't myself have a solid foundation of what exactly is taking place. I have some ideas, but it's only speculation. There are a lot of people who talk about remote neural monitoring, which is kind of like the new buzzword in people that talk about gang stalking and electronic harassment. And a lot of times they'll bring up the idea of synthetic telepathy, that through remote neural monitoring, they can inject thoughts into your stream of consciousness to torment people. But when you're contemplating awareness on a higher level, it's kind of like, what would be the point of that sort of tactic when it seems like there is an intelligence on a scale higher than our perception of reality that is capable of interacting with our stream of consciousness in real time? And that's a bit of a sensitive subject because there's many ways you could look at it. One way would be the hyper-rational interpretation that your subconscious mind, which processes so much more information than the conscious mind, is simply feeding back into your conscious mind in a way that obviously it can't perceive. And that's where your cycles of thought patterns come from. Because if you really pay attention to your stream of consciousness, you'll notice that you can be thinking of one thing, considering some thought, and out of nowhere, maybe like, a minute or two later, you'll find yourself thinking of something that you had no intention of thinking of that just sort of came out of nowhere and it totally threw you off track. And it's like, well, where did that thought come from? Especially when a lot of the times, if you're really contemplating deep concepts, it's a thought pattern that sort of throws you totally off of the wavelength that you were surfing in that moment. So in other words, there's an inclination to view it as an implanted thought, as opposed to some natural subconscious process that sort of bubbled to the surface in that moment. So I suppose it's a matter of perspective and how you want to view the situation. But of course, that is a good way to create a delusion for yourself, and it wouldn't even necessarily be a negative delusion. Meaning there is only one objective truth of the situation, right? But you could create a perception of what's taking place that might make you sleep better at night, But it wouldn't be the truth. But again, it's so difficult to say what is the it's not difficult to say it. It's difficult to prove it to another person, right? Because it's at that level, it's only an intuition and a feeling and an experience or a series of experiences that lead you to that conclusion. For me, when I'm outside and I look at the way that reality is coordinated around me, it's not so difficult to imagine an intelligence on a scale much higher than the scale that we are perceiving that would be able to interact in real time with our minds and our stream of consciousness. Does that mean it's the objective truth? Well, of course not. I can't say that 100%. Because it just as easily could be some sort of natural interaction between the subconscious and the conscious mind. And of course, many people would refer to this as the ego. They would say, yes, this is your ego. This is a distraction, right? Because as I was saying about with respect to the idea of the black holes, your eyes, and your ears, and the way that our senses decode inputs from reality, that is your operating system. And a part of that operating system is your stream of consciousness or your awareness that is thinking in real time. That is deconstructing thought forms or constructing thought forms, as whatever the case may be. So the problem is a lot of people take that process and they say, oh, well, yeah, that's your ego and it's bad. And a lot of that is just, it's not necessarily wrong in the sense of what it's describing. It's just the way that it's word magic as usual. It's the way that word has been co-opted by these new age philosophies that tell you need to dismantle your ego. And then there's all sorts of programming that's embedded within all of the suggestions that surround that idea, as far as systems that supposedly will bring you to enlightenment by dismantling the ego. But as a concept, it's fine. It's your operating system, right? And so you can see how someone could easily describe it either way, as you can anything. Well, that's just your ego, and it is your operating system in this reality, and there is a perfectly natural and explainable interaction between the subconscious mind and the conscious mind that produces your thought stream, and the subconscious mind is so powerful that it just randomly will put thoughts into your mind, at any given moment, and this could easily be perceived as some sort of extra dimensional intelligence manipulating your mind in the moment if you perceived it in that way. The problem, of course, is that when you look at this system of civilization, it's so complex and so coordinated, and has been for so many decades and centuries that, assuming that there is some sort of linear history that is legitimate, going back thousands of years, it's so intricately woven together, and it builds on itself in such a way that you sit there and you look at it and you say, how would it even be possible for someone like myself with my awareness to coordinate such a thing? Surely this has been coordinated by something more advanced or more intelligent than I am. Again, that doesn't mean that they have any connection to the environment and the natural world. Especially when your awareness begins to expand and you start to really get an understanding of what's taking place in this reality, you have certain thought patterns that they're the product of what has happened in your life up until that point. And there's always certain things that will pop up and derail you, in the sense that they are things that you for whatever reason feel guilty about, or you have some shame connected to, or anything that removes your awareness from the intent of this creation. And it's hard not to view the way those thoughts pop into your stream of consciousness as anything other than intentional manipulation. But again, that's not to say that's what it is. Because if you look at what is going on with the building of the deep underground bases that's taking place right now, or has been for a decent amount of time, if there was some sort of, imagine that there was some sort of natural disaster on a huge scale, not necessarily cataclysmic, but just a huge shift in the climate, or some flood event that flooded significant portions of the world. And let's say that happened today, right? And these deep underground bases were then utilized by the intelligence that has been constructing civilization in general, and they waited out the whatever happened, and then, I don't know, 10 years from now, they come out of the deep underground bases. They have a full knowledge of what took place here on Earth. And then they went and interacted with, let's say, random survivors who were not a part of that just managed to survive what had taken place. Well, 10 years might, there could be a lot of devolution that would take place in 10 years if all of the power went out and, there was no computers, no television, there were no trucks carrying food to all the grocery stores. 10 years, there could be a lot of devolution that would take place. I mean, and that's just 10 years. Imagine what would happen if it was 100 years, right? The people that weren't in those underground bases would devolve to, in many ways, it would be, if they had an understanding of what our awareness is supposed to do in relation to its existence within the the environment, it wouldn't, they might in many ways be, have more knowledge than they did before that happened. They would have a better understanding of this reality. But compared to the intelligence that would come out of those underground bases, they wouldn't have any concept of what was going on compared to them, And so you could see how that would be, if it went on for a long enough period of time, the people that came out of those bases might as well be viewed as aliens to them, to the people that were still on the surface of the earth, with their with their technology. And if enough time had passed to where all those ideas had sort of left the morphogenetic field of the people reproducing on the surface of the planet, and they totally reverted back to a completely homeopathic interaction with the earth. I mean, what the people coming out of the bases, which would be, our current state of awareness now, I mean, might as well be alien to them. Like I said, I mean, they would be viewed as gods. And so you can see how that intelligence would be able to so easily manipulate the people that it came into contact with. And so you can get an idea of how it possibly could have went down in the past in reference to the Great Flood, and then sort of how civilization would have been rebooted and started from the beginning with an intelligence that would seem like it's alien to us, but that's not necessarily the explanation or the truth of the matter. In any event, that's just to say that just because we look at, it's so tempting to look at the way civilization is structured now and say, how did this happen? It must have been some extra dimensional entities that are just on a scale higher than us that perceive things in ways that we can't possibly perceive them. It's like, well, maybe we're just we just have no concept of what they knew before that flood happened. And and of course, then they are also distributing propaganda about aliens and secret space program and the Galactic Federation of Light, and putting out movies that give us the concept of what an alien is, and they put out all these concepts about intergalactic civilizations, and the whole thing kind of feeds back on itself. And so you could see how they might be able to create an idea of what is doing all this that sort of points away from them, right? So I'm just leaving that open as a possibility. That it could have easily been something like that. However, at the same time, if it's not just some sort of natural interaction between our subconscious mind and our conscious mind, there does seem to be an influence taking place within our stream of consciousness in real time. That does seem as if it is not some, it's not some human or some human and its technology orchestrating it. But then, of course, you further get into questions like, where did the technology come from in the first place? Where did that idea come from, right? Because famously, like John Dee is said to have, through his ritual magic workings, discovered or was told that we would need to dig up silicon in the future. And of course, silicon is one of the main elements that's used in the construction of computers. And again, I could see it going both ways, maybe a higher intelligence gave that information to these quote unquote humans that are running things on this planet, or maybe through some sort of ritual magic they discovered it on their own. Obviously contacting realms that are beyond this one. Though, of course, then again, many would speculate that, well, you're just entering deep realms of the subconscious when you perform those rituals anyway, and they're all archetypal thought forms that etherically exist on a plane that is not in our dimensional perception, as just beings incarnated in this reality. So you can see how it's a word magic game, and the words have concepts attached to them. And whenever you say the word, it's so charged with conceptual imagery that it really influences the way you are perceiving whatever concept like I was saying with the idea of the ego. I say the word ego, and there's so much energy attached to that term, and it's charged with so much emotion and information and everything that goes along with that it naturally puts an image in your mind of what that is, or at least a concept of what that is. Because the ego is a bit of a etheric concept. It's not necessarily a physical thing. I was reflecting on some of what I was talking about yesterday regarding the New Age philosophies and how they all seem to make an effort to de-emphasize the importance of your physical experience. And it's interesting when you look at all of the traditional religions in the world, because they all are imbued with similar philosophies. And of course, the New Age philosophy is a merger of East and West and a wide array of spiritual and philosophical traditions. That's what all of the writers who put the information together before there was television and movies and the internet, that's what they did. They synthesized it. When you look at the religions of the East, say the Hindu or Buddhist faiths, what's interesting is that they both de-emphasize the importance of physical reality, in the sense that your primary goal on this earth is to reach enlightenment, and as the teachings go, it will take you as many incarnations as it takes to reach that goal. And this is seen reflected in their society in the form of the caste system, which is stratified based on the hierarchy of reincarnations. And of course the goal is to move yourself up the ladder as you continue to reincarnate on Earth. At its core, And this is nothing against the people who are adherents to the faith, because of course they can't help where they were born any more than I can help where I was born. And in the West we have our own versions of mind control, which I'll get to in a second, but it is the perfect mentality to program into the mind of a slave that will not only a slave in this life, but a slave for many lives. If you can convince them that it is only a part of them eventually reaching enlightenment, transcending the physical illusion of reality. When you move to the West, and the Abrahamic phase, and all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of denominations that have broken off from the main three over the years, you see that it's a very similar mentality that is programmed into people's minds, but it's just done slightly different. They are told that everything they do in this physical life, especially if they follow this certain set of rules and guidelines, will be rewarded in their afterlife. So, again, this is a perfect mentality to program into the mind of a slave. Even if your experience is horrific, don't worry. Follow these rules, and you will be rewarded in the afterlife. And then you move to non-religion or atheism, and you see the same thing being programmed into the minds of those who aren't quite comfortable with religion, especially in the West, because so many of its fundamental arguments are based in science. So it's fundamentally the same thing. Well, you're just an ant on this pale blue dot that is one of trillions of planets in a endless universe. The Earth is one of 8 planets moving around the sun, as they're told in the heliocentric model. It used to be 9 planets. I don't know if Pluto's still a planet or not. Your guess is as good as mine. Pluto was a planet when I was younger. Anyway. And there is no provable God or creator in this mindset. So your life really doesn't matter all that much. You're just going to rot in the ground when you're gone, so you just do whatever you want. And nihilism is very closely related to this philosophy, of course. Or atheism breeds nihilism. And then you say, well, actually, you might even live in a simulation. That's what science is starting to prove. It's more likely that we're in some sort of simulation. And hey, if we're in a simulation, well, your life really doesn't matter then. This is all just make-believe. You're in a Sims game. Or alternatively, science is now telling us that you probably live in a multiverse. And this is just one of trillions and trillions of different parallel universes that you exist in. There's trillions of versions of you out there. So yeah, this life, really not all that important in the grand scheme of things. I wouldn't even worry about it. So I don't know, it's fascinating to me, looking at all of these belief systems as a whole. And then, of course, the New Age philosophies merge a lot of the East and the West together, science and religion merging together. And you can see this in all sorts of disciplines, transcendental meditation, all sorts of studies that are out there on consciousness now. And of course, the main takeaway is that reality is an illusion, a creation of the mind. And then there is the idea of the holographic universe or holographic reality, which again programs the same mindset into the people that come to believe in it, that this reality, their experience, is just one grand illusion. Now, of course, there is most likely some truth to that. You know, as someone who has lucid dreamed on many occasions, I understand the philosophy that our experience in this reality, in what we call planet Earth, is possibly a dream. And we're just not lucid in the dream. And in that circumstance, all of these ideas about the illusory nature of reality would be true. But at the same time, you're still having the experience, and it still matters. You know, why is it that when I have my shoes off and my feet on the ground, I feel more alive than I do contemplating any of these other philosophies? There's no book in my hand. There's no YouTube video in my ear. There's no guru standing over to the side telling me what to do. I just know. Why is it that my intuition is perpetually in a heightened state when I am connected to the earth in that way? Why do all of my insights seem to come when I am immersed in the environment in that way? Is there a reason that your physical experience moment to moment is so de-emphasized? Is it possible that this sort of emerging philosophy would be very beneficial in the minds of people that are experiencing increasingly outrageous events in the world? Would we still feel the same way about all of these philosophies that de-emphasize physical reality if this system that was overlaid on top of nature did not exist? Makes you think.